I now call this special call closed meeting, or special meeting to order. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just to double check before I get going into open forum, if you have an open forum request, you need to turn it in to the board secretary. Right now, I only have two. And you have to fill this request out if you want to come up and speak during open forum. All right. Open forum is a time for members of the community to give input at a board meeting regarding school district issues or concerns. Individuals who want to speak, please fill out an open forum request and give it to the board secretary prior to open forum. The form is available in hard copy for in-person attendees or on the school board page of the district's website for those who want to participate virtually. Virtual participants must email their request to Brenda T. at tbren@davenportschools.org by 3 p.m. on the day of the board meeting. The board will not act on any issue presented during open forum if it was not published as an agenda item. Iowa open meetings laws prohibit action on any issue that is not on the agenda. The president may set the amount of time allowed for individuals to speak. The board asks that no charges or complaints be made against individual employees of the district or community. Remarks that reflect negatively on the character or motives of any person will be called out of order. To participate virtually, call 312-626-6799 and enter the conference ID. And, yeah. We had no virtual ones, correct? Okay. All right, we have two open forum requests. We'll do 3 minutes apiece. Up first, I have Ann McGlynn, and then next, Jinx Campbellton. Did I say that right? Okay. And when you come up, please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Good? Okay, great. Thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. My name is Ann McGlynn. I live at 3009 Grand Avenue in Davenport. My two kids are products of Children's Village Hoover, Garfield, Sudlow, and Central. It's an honor to speak in a room named after Jim Hester, who, for those who knew him, died 20 years ago last month. I know several of you personally. And I mean it when I say I appreciate your service to our school district and willingness to consider what I and others have to say. And I did fill out the survey as well, and I think I put my name on it. I'm also here as founder and executive director of Tapestry Farms. We work with refugees in our community. We are connected with 21 kids in 9 Davenport schools. One of those schools is Buchanan. 3 of our kids are Buchanan Bulldogs. 4th grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade. They're really amazing kids. They live right across the street from their school in an apartment at Fairmount Pines. And that's a huge factor in their lives, that they live right across the street from their school. This morning, I took some time to pull the percent of kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch from the State of Iowa website. I noticed that the 3 schools set to close have more kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch than most other schools in the school district. Monroe is number 1 for that percentage at 77.2. Washington is number 2 at 70.8. Buchanan is number 7 at 63.5. So today I come to ask, why are we closing the schools with a higher percentage of kids whose families don't have as many resources as others? Why do we put this on the backs of kids who often have more barriers to face? Why do we not ask first, how can we mitigate whatever problem we need to solve by closing schools with more kids whose families have more resources. If we flip the list on its head, with the least percentage of kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch, the number 1, 2, and 7 slots, like the schools that are being closed, are Bluegrass, Eisenhower, and McKinley. Now, I would still be speaking here if these schools were on the list. We're connected with 2 kids at Eisenhower and 4 kids at McKinley. And I agree with the premise that our schools should be as diverse socioeconomically as possible. But why not figure out a way to close the schools with a higher number of higher SES kids to balance things out instead? Now, I do want to say that the fact that the state of Iowa has systematically allotted less money for our kids for decades is at the root of why we are all here talking about closing schools. The school district has lost millions and millions of dollars over the past 40 years because of this inequitable and completely maddening practice. From reading about last meeting and looking at the slides, it does sound like this is pretty much a done deal and that there's a state deadline to meet. Buchanan isn't on a, quote, primary access route, as the report states, unless you're one of the kids who happens to live right across the street from their school. The 3 kids I know walk across the street to eat breakfast each morning at school. They told me that yesterday when I visited their home. With the closure of their school, the 3 schools that are considered for Buchanan, the least amount is that they'll be bused is 2 miles away. The most is 4 miles away. So my one request is this. If Buchanan does close in Monroe and Washington, when you're making the bus schedule, please make sure that they're able to make it to their new school on time to eat each morning without having to get on a bus when it's still dark outside in the winter. It would also be nice if they could still have access to their playground too, where they go to play, especially their older brother who loves to play basketball. Thanks.
Thank you. You're up.
Hello, my name is Jinx Gambleton. I'm here with Brooke Frond for the incident that happened earlier this Monday last week, I'm sure. Yes. Sorry, this is very nerve-wracking for me. I don't do this often. But I am concerned with how things seem to have gotten worse since I have left school. I had to deal with being bullied myself, and her son has been bullied and has been asking for help from the adults around him. And then things escalated on last Monday to where now the father of this boy is in having to deal with the consequences of trying to protect his son, which I know I've had to keep my parents from doing for me when I was in school. And luckily I was able to do that, but sadly for Noah, this did not happen. And I just want to know what will be done to keep these parents from having to interact in a way that might get them arrested, even when they're just trying to protect their children from what seems to be growing, I'm very anxious, what seems to be growing aggression in these younger kids when it comes to bullying. When I was younger, I did not get jumped, but it seems that it's getting worse and worse with the years, and they need more protection from these teachers, and they need these teachers to care more about them and their safety. What does zero tolerance mean, by the way? Like, what would happen?
The question is, the school board has a zero tolerance for bullying, so what does zero tolerance mean to the school board? Because zero tolerance in my head means an incident, they're done. I've called your guys' school 60 times since August about my son, and all the kids who have bullied my son are still in school. One of the kids who jumped my son is still in school. So what does zero tolerance mean to the school board? That's all we have if somebody wants to answer the question.
So open forum is just for you all to come and talk to us. We don't,
You don't respond to it?
correct. It's not a back and forth because it wasn't a posted item.
Okay. Well, noted. Go ahead.
Thank you for hearing our point.
All right, being as we only had 2 open forum requests, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, and then we're gonna start our next meeting at 6:30. I thought we would have had a lot more time for this, so. The motion's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned. I now call this Committee of the Whole, the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, our only item we're going to be talking about tonight is the long-range facilities plan. I will turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you very much. Tonight, our two main presenters are going to be, again, John from Bray, and then Mr. Driscoll. One of the key considerations that the school board has asked that you do is to look at a couple of things. The first one being, what are the impacts on the schools, the capacity on the schools? Going to asked us to review the busing impacts on the schools. And so tonight we are going to give a very high-level overview. We know that we can move forward with minimal impacts in all the areas that we've discussed tonight. I'm very proud of our team. They've been working very hard to get every piece of data that we can so it can be counted. So some of the key assumptions for us tonight is that we know that all along this process that we have to continue to bring the board proposals, and that seems to be working. So the path that we're going to continue to do is we're going to bring you a proposal for boundaries, for the way that we're going to shift, things of that nature. And then the board has done an outstanding job of getting feedback from the community, and then we're going to adjust. And so tonight, the goal for tonight, I really want to take this at a high level, is that we have a very big decision to make on December 12th. And that is the phase one of school closures, which will allow us to move forward. And I want you to know that the information that you're going to be shared today is going to prove that we can move forward and do that with confidence. We have a path and a plan to do that, and the operational savings will be very optimal for the district. So one of the things I would like to challenge the school board tonight is that when you see things, ask questions. But really, we have a lot of work to do ahead of us in phase one, which is absolutely critical. Tonight, we're focused on the big decision that we have to make December 12th, and we believe that we're going to bring enough information before tonight to allow you to make that decision comfortably on December 12th. These are incredibly difficult decisions, and we've been working tirelessly to make sure that you have enough information to make that decision. We see this as an opportunity to balance as much as possible in our district, minimal impact on busing for tonight. And we believe that we have stuck to the 1.5 mile walk zone with very minimal impact to our busing. The other key assumption is that our sixth grade will be staying for the 23-24 school year. And the cadence for this process, again, is that we know that we've got to bring you proposals for the next phase. We're gonna continue to seek feedback, and then we're going to adjust. So with that being said, kind of setting the stage for tonight, John and Ben, I have a quick story about Mr. Driscoll. He has an art brain. He was a art teacher in his past life. And when we were sitting down and meeting with the architects, he said, I can run that program. And so learned the program in a night, and has basically knows every parcel in Davenport after redrawing these boundaries as many times as they have. So a point of celebration for our cabinet, as they're very talented. And Mr. Driscoll saved us some money by learning a software, and it allowed us to be really nimble. We had the ability to say, what if you move this line over here and that line over there? And so we've adjusted, knowing that this is a proposal, and I've said that word 3 times, as you say, Dan, as many touches as possible. So on that word. So without anything else, we're going to turn it over to John and get our presentation going. What I would suggest is that these two have spots where they would like to ask their questions. So if you wouldn't mind, sometimes the presentations build on itself. So when they say this is an opportunity to ask questions, I think that would be a good format to move forward. John, thank you.
Thank you. And with me, as always, every slide is an opportunity for a question. It's a heavy bit of weight that we are considering, and so ensuring that the board is yielding any opportunity to ask a question or get clarification, we want to present that opportunity. A good portion of what I'm going to show is going to look very familiar, and that is intentional. This is a public format session, and we want to create as much opportunity for the community as a whole to be witness to the information and be informed. So a lot of what I'm going to walk through will look very similar to what you saw last week and a few weeks prior to that. But I think it's good to keep in our minds what we're here for and what we're discussing, give the community as a whole an opportunity to see this. So there will be some new information, and Ben's going to talk through a lot of that. So it's a very simple agenda. We're going to talk about our organizational change. There's going to be a pretty lengthy piece of information that centers on boundary and busing, transportation. We will review costs, and again, we will close with some discussion. So again, district organization. The initial considerations, as we've been talking, is that there will be a closure of 3 elementary school buildings in the district, moving from 17 to 14 elementary schools. That would be Buchanan, Monroe, and Washington. There would be no construction necessary to accommodate students at the other buildings. There's adequate number of capacity that students could be distributed to adjacent buildings, which would allow those students to easily move from one elementary to another. The selection of schools was based upon several considerations. Those buildings were selected regionally through the district. So there is a eastern portion of the district, a northwestern, and a southwestern. There is one building from each region of the district. It is very hard to make a decision on any building throughout any region in the district because it affects families, it affects community. It is a weighty decision, but it ultimately should steer us towards a direction of making improvements in the district that benefits everyone. In the southwestern and eastern portion of the district, Monroe and Washington were identified. These are very old buildings. They have been verified as not being listed on any historic listing or registry. There is a considerable amount of prospective cost with making repairs and improvements to those buildings, a majority of that being deferred maintenance. The existing classrooms are small, they're long and narrow, it's multi-story construction, and that becomes difficult to change and improve because of bearing wall locations. The multi-story conditions are hard to make accessible. And then each of these 2 buildings are in direct proximity to one of your intermediate schools. Intermediate schools for the long term likely are going to need some level of improvement, and that is going to put property at a premium. And with the district owning an adjacent elementary school, that is property that's already owned. So by taking Monroe and Washington out, that yields the necessary space that could be utilized for making changes at those intermediate schools down the road. It wants to change. There we go. Buchanan was identified due to a different set of factors. It is in the northwestern portion of the district. It has lower enrollment than Fillmore and Harrison. Truman, which is in that region, has had the most recent investment of capital funds for building improvements. Fillmore, Harrison, and Truman are more closely aligned with primary access routes, meaning they're on major roadways, which does provide better access for families and students, for buses, for vehicular travel, for any logistical concerns with those buildings. The closure of Buchanan also allows redistribution of students to buildings that are located in more high-density population portions of the city. It also does present some opportunity to incorporate distribution to Walcott or Jackson, Walcott being in the very western portion of the district. Within each of these regions, the East, Northwest, and Southwest, students are predominantly being distributed to 3 buildings. In theory, it's a little bit more complicated. So as Ben talks through the mapping, you're going to see that every move has an effect on anywhere from 1 to 3 adjacent building attendance boundaries. So it becomes a very complex solution. There is a method that will unfold itself as you see this that'll help better help everyone better understand how these moves are being made. So we'll talk about that in a minute. In addition, the current moves are all being done with 6th graders remaining in the elementary schools, as TJ noted. Those 6th graders would stay for 1 year and then move in the 24-25 school year, which then would yield space that would allow for creation of preschool at each elementary building, which is an important goal of the board and would become very quickly possible. Just a quick revisit of the organization. So the current chart on the screen is the organization illustrating elementary schools on the left-hand portion of the screen. The center tealish color is the intermediate schools. The right-hand green is the high schools. What's moved off to the left are the 3 buildings being closed. The arrows draw to the primary location where those students are being redistributed. This not only illustrates the number of schools, but the path of students take as they move from elementary to middle to high school. Sorry, the mouse is not as responsive, but as we look at the top portion of the slide, we can see that Walcott Elementary, Bluegrass Elementary, Buffalo Elementary, there's no change to those in the western portion of the district at this time. Those are feeders to the Walcott Intermediate. Monroe would predominantly distribute its students to Hayes, Jefferson, and Wilson. As we move down, Washington predominantly restructures so that kids are distributed to Madison, McKinley, and Garfield. And then Buchanan students would be predominantly distributed to Fillmore, Truman, and Harrison. Again, more to come in this in a moment. But then as we see, the organization becomes more clean for the district, where we have 3 elementary buildings serving as a feeder to each of the intermediates throughout the district. As those intermediates feed to the high school, keep in mind that district policy still is an open enrollment at the high school level, so students could follow the path that's shown, or they do have the option to enroll in any high school throughout the district. That is not being proposed to change. Preliminary timeline. So in theory, we're just to the right of the very first dot, which is we're in December. We've already had discussion about buildings to be closed. Here in December, the board will make a vote for taking action. Once this happens, the next 2 lines are critical. We need to really push to finalize boundary changes and begin transition planning for students and staff. We would like to use all of the time that we have through the next semester of the school year to prepare families and staff for the changes that are being made. Once the school year ends, the current school year ends, those buildings would effectively be closed. And at the start of the at the start of the 23-24 school year, the elementary students would start at their new buildings. At the start of the 24-25 school year, sixth graders would start at the new middle schools. And then that would give us the opportunity at the start of the 24-25 school year to have preschool start at each of the elementaries. As a phase two, we touched on this briefly last week, but one goal the district has stated is important is to also provide improvements at the high school level. One such project could be considering change and improvement to the North High School. There is currently work proposed to be happening at West. So this work at North could be considered to start sometime in the year of 2023, which would set the course for project completion that could be occupied in 2025. And that would all be work that could occur without any tax impact to voters. So that is using money that the district already has in hand. So now we're going to get to the more complex part of the program tonight. This is boundary and transportation. So last week we noted a date, December 31st, for a deadline for boundary map changes. I wanted to clarify that's for major boundary changes only, so the entire district as a whole. We're not proposing any major boundary change. This is all localized attendance center changes. So we are not obligated to make that decision before December 31st. However, we would recommend that this occur as soon as even January, because the more time that we allow after that vote, we would dedicate towards planning the transition and creating a communication plan for community members. When you look at the data, you're going to see it based on a couple of different things. There will be projected enrollment for each building, and that projected enrollment is going to be compared to the minimum, maximum, and average capacity for each building. The goal has been to target trying to meet the average capacity for each building so as to not overburden it and also to not underburden it. If we get too low in the capacity for each building, moving the sixth graders out could start to drop the attendance numbers at that school, which could be problematic as it relates to funding or programming for those buildings. So looking at a good number is a functional application that's critical to the success of that building. Safe walk paths and transportation needs are critical to the decisions being made. Being mindful of future pathways, so the big picture master plan is also important to keep in mind. That would help having to make changes again in the future for the boundaries. This next point Ben's going to touch on here in a moment. So this addresses concerns with above and below poverty line. So I'm gonna just pause on this for 1 second. And then this last point here, reasonable boundaries must be used to maintain continuity of neighborhoods and avoid contrived divisions throughout the district. We're not just trying to draw a zigzag through town because that captures the right number of people for a building. We want to have boundaries that don't split neighborhoods and maybe follow natural paths like creek beds or parkways, because that becomes a better measure of keeping neighborhoods contiguous. Get this to move. For busing, the district currently has a contract for 80 bus routes. Historically, the district has had as many as 120 routes. The current work being done is to accommodate these boundary changes while keeping within the contracted quantity of routes, which means we would avoid incurring any additional transportation costs. So we know we have 80 routes. If we can make this plan work while staying at or below, then we are going to be okay in terms of budget. Any fewer routes than 80 falls under the contract value with Durham. Therefore, changes will achieve a net zero increase for busing contract. That also will make sure that we have a bit of contingency as it relates to busing concerns. State law requires busing at a 2-mile distance. However, at the elementary level, the district uses a policy of 1.5 miles, and Ben will talk about how that distance is applied to the boundaries which are being drawn. So with that, I am going to move this mouse over to Ben, and he's going to lead through some of the building boundary issues that we've been looking at.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for John before? Thank you. All right, I'll keep moving. So as the superintendent said at the outset, and John has reiterated, we are operating with some key assumptions. I'd like to point out in yellow up at the top, to the extent that is reasonably possible. And of course, that's going to allow for some subjectivity. But these were the 5 bullets that we were going off of, and they've been said a couple times. We would like our buildings as much as possible to reflect the average demographic of our community. The capacity study is the second one. We don't want to make any recommendations or proposals that our buildings cannot accommodate. Of course, we want to limit the number of families impacted any way we can. We're utilizing main thoroughfares. John was just speaking about that, and I'll show some examples of that. And and this last bullet is that we are a district of quite a few elementary buildings. And while it is understandable that the adjacent buildings will take the lion's share of the students, we also recognize that there are times where maybe picture a bumper car, where one car bumps into the first car, and that's going to bump into the second car. And of course, that the impact would be not quite as great, but there still would be an impact. So there are times when we are proposing a boundary line move to here, and then the adjacent might move the boundary line in just a little to accommodate that. And so then there is that domino effect. And so that is a possibility, and it did happen in some of our proposals. So we're going to start with our numbers. So here is that capacity study that Bray did on the top left. This is not for our entire district. It is just for these buildings that would remain after 3 closures. This is how many students. This would be the average cap and minimum according to the Bray study. These are projected statistics, and as you saw on a previous slide, we're at about 66% that are at the free and reduced or below that line, and there's about 34% district-wide. I'm going to show you the next slide because this is going to show you the North region with Buchanan removed from the North region. You could see 4 boundary lines, and we'll take a look at each one of those individually. I'm going to go to our very first slide, and we're going to use this as our example because we'll see a slide like this for each of our proposed boundary adjustments. So Adams being first in the alphabet for the North region, you'll notice that in the top left, it could fit up to 654. And if we went too far below 578, we might think about, is that good use of that space? And so you'll notice that this boundary line drawn here represents 615 elementary students that would be boundaried to Adams Elementary, which you see that 615 is literally right at that average cap. The students that live inside of that proposed boundary line would be 69% low SES, so just 3 percentage points below our district average. And for every slide that you're going to see, there will be a notable section right here. And what that would be referred to is the neighborhood from Buchanan to Adams. So I'm going to call your attention over to the image, please. The thick red line is the proposed boundary that we are proposing right now, which accounts for these numbers right here. If you look in the background, you'll see a black line. It's a little bit thinner. Those are the boundaries that exist currently as we sit here right now. So now I'm going to go back to that notable. neighborhood from Buchanan to Adams. Oopsie, sorry, redundant typo. That would be referring to this neighborhood right here, because we can see in the background it was purple and this was Buchanan's. This neighborhood would join the Adams Elementary All-Stars. And this neighborhood right here is currently, as we sit here, this is an Adams neighborhood, and it is being proposed that this would be a Wilson neighborhood. So that's what this would say, neighborhood from Adams to Wilson. Now, I won't go to it in this length with each slide. I'm not going to talk you through each one, but I'll give this board an opportunity to take a look at it, see the numbers on their own. You don't need me to read them to you. Review those, review the notables. I'll give about a minute and then I will move on. If you have any clarifying question, the superintendent said, if you have specific questions about a specific rationale or reason why, we would ask that you jot that down. But if there is a clarifying question while that slide is up, feel free to ask at the time. Sound good? Okay, well, with that, I would offer or I'd ask, is there any clarifying questions right now about Adams before proposed? Okay, go ahead.
I have,
Yeah.
I guess I don't know.
Whatever you want, Mr. President.
So the little triangle there, I'm just curious, like how many students are in there? I'm just, in my mind, I'm thinking you would just go Hickory Grove all the way to where it goes to Locust instead of carving that little bit out. Does it add like a bunch of kids or something? Is that the...
So what I would tell you is the superintendent discussed at the beginning that I went home and kind of got into this. So this program, every one of these little icons represents a family. Okay. And so this family may have one student. This family may have 4 students. And in certain cases, it's a P.O. box for potentially like a mobile home park. And that dot could represent 75 students. So when you ask that, I can't tell you right now. If you needed to know something, I could pull out that, not now, of course, pull it up. I could tell you their ages, their socioeconomic and everything. The bumper car that I talked about before, that was with those key assumptions. It was all part of these. It was all in an effort to get us to those 5. So if you ask specific about any specific one, it's got about 75 other potentially associated factors to it, but it's all around the 5 key assumptions. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So the next one up would be Fillmore. Give you a little quick tour. This does not change. The boundary line between Truman and Fillmore does not change. There's some slight adjustments here. And then the one is this neighborhood right here that was previously slated for Harrison would be slated for Fillmore in this case. Harrison would be our next elementary in the North region. Give you a few seconds to look at the demographic numbers. So this was the neighborhood that I was just referencing that was being, it used to be a Harrison, it would be slated for Fillmore, and this would be one down here that was slated Garfield previously, and in this proposal is slated for Harrison. Next up would be Truman Elementary. You'll notice that the proposed enrollment is exactly at that average cap. You'll notice that it's just a little bit below, remember 66, so that's 5 percentage points. Notable, pretty much most of Buchanan is slated to, in this proposal, would be attending Fillmore. Excuse me, Truman, thank you. And then no changes here and there. And that would take us through the 4 buildings on the North region. You'll notice that when it's all said and done and you combine all 4 regions, we're just a percentage point off of what our district average is. And you'll also notice that the enrollment is staying below the average. Central region. We have 5 buildings that constitute the central region: Jefferson, Madison, McKinley, Garfield, and Eisenhower. You'll notice a few percentage points below on the low SES, but within a couple 3. We're going to start with McKinley. Give me a second to look at their numbers. So this one is a little crowded in here, so I'm going to give you a quick tour. So this is Iowa Street, would be the western border, and that's Kirkwood Boulevard, Bix Boulevard, coming down through here. This is Jersey Ridge Road up to Elm Street. This is Duck Creek Park, so nobody lives in here. This was McKinley, remains McKinley. So Madison neighborhood to McKinley, that's this one here. That's this orange here. Garfield neighborhood to McKinley. That's written backwards, I apologize. That's the McKinley neighborhood right here to Garfield. I don't know why I said it twice. Eisenhower. Give you a second to look at the numbers. You'll note it's exactly at that district average, 6634, and a few changes here. In this proposal, there's a Washington neighborhood that would be slated for Eisenhower. There's some Fillmore property using that main thoroughfare of Highway 61 headed north, but there are not homes in there currently. And then there's just a small little neighborhood right here, McKinley neighborhood, that would be going to Eisenhower. Garfield. Look at the numbers. You'll note when you look here at my mouse, right, the lion's share of the Washington students in this proposal would be assigned to Garfield. There are just a few. This was the McKinley one that I was referencing prior. It would be west of Jersey Ridge and north of Kirkwood, in that little pocket right there. In this proposal would be set for Garfield. And that just must have carried over. I'm back.
In the notable there, it says Washington neighborhood to Eisenhower, and all those say to Eisenhower, but you were saying Garfield's?
That's where I said, I think I maybe copied and pasted. This is Garfield's, and so I think that I just made a new slide and didn't change that. I'm sorry, Director Gordon. Okay. Thanks for that catch. Make a note of that. Here's Madison's. Thank you. This would be the bumper car.
Hey, hold on real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For clarification, because we got like 2 cameras now, that will be updated before it gets posted to the website.
Thank you.
So no one jumps the gun and freaks out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This would be a little bit of that bumper car that I was talking about a little bit, that I was talking about before, where Jefferson needed to absorb some of, this is the old Monroe attendance zone. So that when Jefferson absorbs some of those, then Jefferson needs some of our Madison students, and Madison would need some of our Jefferson students, and McKinley would need some of those in order to keep everyone in those 5 key assumptions. So Jefferson to Madison would be this one right here. Madison neighborhood to McKinley would be this orange here that we saw on the last. And there's a small little Madison neighborhood, which is right in here. That would be headed to Garfield, which was east of Grand Avenue. Moving on to Jefferson. Here's our numbers. And this is what I was just referring to before. This is the Monroe students that would now, in this proposal, go to Jefferson, and these were the kids that would be welcomed in Madison. That takes us to the end of the central region for those 5 buildings. Again, noting that we are staying at or below the average capacity, closer to the min capacity in this case, and within 3 percentage points on either side. So the last region is the West region, of course. Numbers up here. This consists of 6 buildings. Starting with Bluegrass, you'll see the numbers. And notable that there are no boundary changes in this proposal. Buffalo is next. Capacity, projected enrollment with this proposal. There is one neighborhood right here that currently is Buffalo attendance zone. This proposal has this neighborhood attending Hayes. The reason for the question marks on capacity study is this is when Bray and they walk through all the buildings. So we could separate the kids and say that's a first grade student, a second, a third, fourth, all the way up to 8th. But when it comes to classrooms, you can use a room for whatever you want. So it was very challenging to separate the capacity study to show, so that's the reason for the question marks.
I can clarify that Walcott is the only K-8 building in the district, and so capacity was run as a K-8 module, and so it becomes a little bit of a challenge to understand how to target that if we separate it as elementary and middle independently for the reasons that Ben just noted. If there's question that arises after this, we can dig in deeper and start to pull that information out. But at the moment, all this information is keeping in mind that Walcott serves as a K-8 building.
So the one notable here is you'll notice the eastern boundary along Wisconsin in this, it was moved to Wisconsin from its previous. So the previous boundary was this black line here. And literally when I ran that little tool, this was the only family that lived there and they were already attending Walcott. So there's no changes for any families in here, but when we started digging into potential future developments, we thought that this was the best case in this with what we know.
Did you say Buffalo, some students are going to go to Hayes? Isn't Buffalo already very low in population? Why are we moving them to Hayes?
Is that something we want to enter that conversation now, or is that?
We'll write it down. Yep.
So for Hayes, here are our numbers. And so this would be Director Klein-Jerome's question would be this one right here. This is that neighborhood referencing. So here's Sunderbrook Park, and these are the students that are living right there next to Hayes that are currently Buffalo students. This takes us all the way up to Monroe Elementary's spot right here on 3rd Street, and that is that boundary line, and then it comes down there in this proposal. Jackson Elementary. So if you look up in this area, this would be the case where we learned that about the P.O. box. There's quite a few students that live in this neighborhood, close to 100, that would be attending Jackson with these boundary lines. And so it does not necessarily look like that at first blush. So I wanted to point that out. And Wilson. So in Wilson Elementary, you'll see this is the one that our president pointed out early. There's that little triangle there, and the heads that live in there. Of course, the heads don't represent. It could be one per, it could be a few more. This is the Monroe district here, with February Park right here to give you a sense of where that. So Adams neighborhood to Wilson in this proposal, and Monroe neighborhood to Wilson in this proposal. West region, looks like 6337 in terms of the socioeconomic. You'll see the 2200 is well below the capacity, and 6 elementary schools that make it up. Now, it didn't translate from slides to PDF, so I apologize. But I do want to point something out here. If you looked at the so we've got our north region, obviously our central and our west. And this is, I'm gonna give you the numbers here so it doesn't hurt anybody's brain. So central, 31% above high SES, 69 low. North is 3367, and west would be 3763. Again, I'm sorry for how this reads. We'll get it cleaned up before it gets posted anywhere. And enrollment, color coding again, 2477, 2122. And that brings us back to our title slide.
So just to keep moving forward, the high and low SES was a benchmark used for working on attendance boundaries because it is a goal to keep each school as close to matching the district profile as much as possible, which is also beneficial because it allows distribution of funds, which touch more students as they move to those attendance centers. Again, we looked last week at the impact of capacity. So the numbers that Ben just worked through in the center column, we chart where the numbers are. These numbers are already incorrect because those boundary study numbers are moving. So we will finalize this projection as the boundary finalizes, but what we are trying to establish is where these buildings land in final as an over or under capacity. The primary goal being to keep each building as much close to the median capacity as possible. However, you did see some buildings tend to fall under. The capacity that we're looking at is based on the current 22-23 calendar year, the enrollment numbers that were certified this past fall. And note that predominantly Buffalo, Bluegrass, and Walcott have not been considered for change, meaning there was no intentional moving of any buildings in that region in the district. We also did study the move of 6th graders to the middle schools just to ensure how that could happen. So looking at the numbers, the projected enrollment of 6th graders to those middle school buildings could occur, again, without requiring any substantial change in terms of renovation, remodeling, construction. Those students would fit in the buildings within the capacity targets, meaning they do not impact the maximum capacity for each of those buildings. This too will be finalized as we kind of wrap up numbers, knowing how the moves at the elementary school do have an impact on the middle schools. Again, this is using 22-23 enrollment, and we did not show any change at Walcott, meaning the consideration of aligning Walcott with a 6-8 as opposed to its current 7-8 has not been considered at this time or discussed at this time. So this is a lot of information. It is also a lot for the general public to have to comprehend. So the district has commenced planning for transition. This has occurred with the leadership cabinet and principals throughout the district. Those principals began seeing some early iterations of boundary changes because it affects the families that they're most closely tied to. Their input is critical to some of that decision that will be made. As transition planning occurs, it has been identified that communication is paramount, meaning there will need to be a communication for students and their families and for staff in the district. This communication doesn't just apply to the buildings getting closed, but to the entire district. As Ben mentioned, the bumper car syndrome, this change affects everyone throughout the entire district. And so we want to make sure that communication provides broad outreach so that every family understands the changes occurring within the Davenport School District. In addition, as these boundary changes become finalized, there will be changes at the schools that remain throughout the district. So creating opportunities for students to tour and become oriented with the buildings they will be moving to will be critical to their success of moving to those buildings. Providing counseling opportunities for the students and families at any of the buildings in the district will help them with the difficulties of making this change. Any building that is not being closed will begin to provide outreach to the students, family, and staff at the buildings being closed and welcome them in for the events and programs that occur at those buildings. To start now to help them become at home at those buildings will be better for the success as those students make those changes. Staff development will be needed as well. So providing opportunities for staff to start working with the other staff in other buildings throughout this district will be needed to help as these changes become implemented. And then for the district in total, to provide ceremonies for those buildings being closed, to honor and acknowledge them and provide an opportunity for families and general public to honor those buildings before they're gone. Staffing, again, the district currently has about 100 positions open or hires for about 100 positions per year. Monroe, Washington, and Buchanan have 67 teachers. So, it's pretty quickly understandable that all staff is needed through this transition. There will be no staff reductions because of these closures. The only reductions would be through natural attrition. And through that natural attrition, efficiencies will be realized as the district moves forward in time. There will be supports needed for this. Some of these are broad topics, and these discussions will continue. That will be part of the transition planning that occurs after a vote is made on any building closures. There will be administrative needs at every building. Again, we're talking about changing the program and size of curriculum in each building, and so making sure we have good support for the administration in each building, having behavioral support in each building, understanding the needs as it impacts special education, our counseling, making sure that the changes that happen are done well will help with staff retention, and it will help the district as it looks to hire new employees as time moves on. After these changes occur, the staff in those buildings will be able to better understand space needs and potential remodeling needs in those buildings. We know that students fit at a capacity standpoint, but that doesn't always project the perfect picture of what any building needs. So as we move through these changes, we can begin to identify any changes that might be beneficial to help create a more successful elementary experience. Understanding teacher compensation is important for the district as well. As we start to look at efficiencies in the district, understanding that compensation is integral to making sure that we do retain and attract new staff throughout the transition. And as Director Klein-Jerome mentioned only a week ago, making sure that there's compensation to help people make the transition as well. That would be critical to the success of this. And then being able to utilize AEA staff as we make these changes will be also beneficial for success in the changes that occur for the district. From a cost and expense standpoint, there will be some impact to busing. In the general fund, that hits the district through the drivers and the routes. However, there will be operational efficiencies, which were mentioned just a couple slides ago, through natural staff attrition. There will be positions that either moves happen, retirements happen, and those could yield well over $1 million in savings to the district. So this is no changes to staff other than what would occur naturally. From the Save Pepple standpoint, there would be an impact from the number of vehicles necessary for busing. However, keep in mind that we noted just a minute ago that we're cognizant that there's 80 routes contracted, and we're trying to make the changes that are being proposed. We're trying to make sure that those stay within that contracted value of busing. So we are working very hard to try to not increase any busing costs through any change. There will be a savings just in operation of each building that is projected on the screen, both in an annualized amount, and if you look at that over the life of a bond, that becomes a very sizable number. So looking at a 20-year period of time becomes a very big number for the district. You are talking on average annually well over $500,000 a year for the district. There is deferred maintenance for each building. I mentioned early on in the presentation that Monroe and Washington have sizable numbers. That is $20 million between the two buildings. That is a $2 million expense at Buchanan, not near as much, but together your surplus of $22 million for the entire district. This is not money that has to be spent right away in one effort, but it is money that has to get spent at some time. These are maintenance and repair deficiencies that often occur just because there's trouble keeping up with buildings when you have as many buildings as Davenport does. So to say you don't have to do these expenses at one time doesn't mean you can't ever do them, can't never do them. You have to incur that cost at some time. By removing these buildings from the logs of the district, it will allow you to redistribute those funds towards other buildings, which will help create more success by solving some of the issues in those facilities. And I believe that was the last of this information.
So as we wrap up, before we start our discussion, just want to make sure that, thank you, John. Just want to make sure that everything you've seen here is a proposal. And the reason for bringing this here today is that we are confident that the board can move forward making its decision next week. Whether or not it looks and feels like this, that's where a proposal gets feedback and can be adjusted, and the board has proven that they're willing to do that. So with all the information up there, now we'd like to open it up for discussion.
Director Gordon.
If you could for a minute, could you please go back to slide, I think it was 5 and 6 maybe, where you discussed the considerations for why those buildings were chosen. I had some comments about that, but I wanted to look at it while I know that one of them was slide 6 and I think the other one was 5. Okay, so looking at this one, I understand these things make sense to me for Monroe and Washington. Their buildings are older, the costs are higher, the smaller classrooms and the multi-story construction is more expensive to fix. Can you now scroll to slide 6, please? The considerations for Buchanan, on the other hand, I don't feel are as concrete and solid reasoning behind them. This seems more like it doesn't say anything specifically about what's wrong with Buchanan that it needs to be on the chopping block right now. It doesn't say anything about its buildings being older or multi-story or non-functional. It just talks about the other buildings, and to me, that's not a great reason, especially when we've heard of so many reasons why Buchanan is an important building in our community. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then in addition, on that last slide about projected operational savings and deferred expenses, Buchanan's were significantly lower than those of Monroe and Washington. So that's another consideration.
I think there's a couple of other, those are valid points. I think there's a couple of other really important things to note. So it notes up here that Fillmore was recently remodeled. The one right before Fillmore was Truman. So our two newest remodeled buildings border Buchanan. Fillmore, Truman, and Harrison also all have a cafeteria and a gymnasium. Is that accurate, John? So one of the immediate investments that would need to happen is that gymatorium would need to be there. So those are also other key considerations that go into it. I also want to say that if we don't, at the rate that we sit now, if it's not Buchanan, then it's one of those other three. And so picking by the region, that's where John keeps reminding us when we looked in the region, because we tried to keep it region based, it's regional based. So it may seem like, well, those points may not go district wide, but they're very relevant in that region. And those are two other points to consider. Those major investments, we basically flipped the schools of Fillmore and Truman in a summer. I don't know if many of you remember that, but the second school got out, the troops went in and remodeled all of the classrooms and completely revamped them. So the investment is there in those two buildings, and the gymnasium and the cafeteria spaces are there. So those are two other considerations.
I would also add that the district facility expense in the northern region is lower than elsewhere, and it makes sense. If you recall back to the original facility study, the oldest buildings in the district tend to fall in the east and southwest portion of the district. And so what we find is as we move north, northwest, and west, we have single-story buildings that are much newer. They're a little better situated. They've been constructed more recently, which means they just don't have as much disrepair. So that becomes a challenge, and it does become a very difficult decision. As TJ just noted, you have predominantly 4 buildings in that north region. To really pick which one is a difficult answer, and so the investment that the district made at Truman and Fillmore was critical to that decision making.
Director Klandrow.
Monroe and Washington needs a lot of maintenance by the numbers up there. And I don't know exactly what it is, roofing, HVAC, whatever it is. Okay, we're going to vacate those buildings, down the road. Are we going to sell them, tear them down? You can't let the roof go forever or some of these other things. So isn't some of that money still going to be directed? I mean, what do we do? Just let it crumble and fall down? Or you aren't walking away and not putting something into a building, I would assume.
There's 2 best recommendations for those 2 buildings. The first would be to raise the building, demolish it. It is a expense that you would incur, but it is a percentage fraction of the cost that you're facing with that building. that is the best answer only because it does yield property that stays within the district that you can use as the adjacent intermediate buildings would grow and change. A second option is they are old enough to be considered historic, which means you could offer them up for redevelopment and sell those. Those could be adapted in the hands of a private owner. Those could seek out tax credits, which would allow an investment in those properties should they have a conversion in their usage type. That is a double-edged sword. It's an option. Two things that developers look at is how much is it going to cost to bring that building up to a par? How much do we have to invest in it to make whatever change we're doing with that? And then where is it located and how much parking does it have? So it's not an easy answer as to whether those would sell in their current regions, but those are probably the two best options that you have for those buildings.
Director Poston?
Is it possible to get a rough idea of what the cost would be to tear those two buildings down?
It is. I've run some scenarios. I should double check those and provide those to you after the meeting, but we have run a scenario on what that demolition cost is.
And then how strongly do you feel as far as tearing those buildings down, as far as the need for those two campuses? Is that going to be a priority in our long-range plan? Have you had that discussion?
So parts of the plans that we have reviewed and discussed share for a reimagining at our middle school level and a middle school concept. And in order for us to do that and create our true feeders, that land is going to be at a premium. And so in both the academics, the arts and the academics, or the arts and athletics, that's going to be critical in those places. And that will really set the stage for our middle school level for a very long time. So yes, some of the paths forward that we have involve a re-imaging of our middle school concept at both those campuses. So the reinvestment into the community and at the both Smart campus and the Sudlow campuses is very exciting and a wonderful opportunity. So that is before us. So depending on what pathway we have, it's a very exciting proposal to move forward, and it stays within the budget that we have right now, not asking for a bond. And so that is one pathway that we have been exploring. We've been exploring many pathways, but that's one of them, and it is very exciting and addresses what the community is requesting.
So does our projected enrollment verify that those two locations is where we'll need the two campuses?
So currently our projected enrollment is steady at the south of Locust area. Is that accurate, John?
I believe that's correct, yeah.
We can get that information for you.
Then on another subject, as I've mentioned previously, I still feel that sixth grade should be moved by 2023. By delaying that for another year, we're also delaying getting preschool in our elementaries. And if we're going to improve early literacy, a big first step is going to be having preschool in our elementaries. So why do we want to delay that another whole year? So that is a big stickler for me. But as far as I'm concerned, you've got me over the barrel, because we have to vote for this because we have no choice, okay? But I'm definitely against sixth grade, but I'm going to have to vote for this with closing the three schools, because from a financial standpoint, we don't have any other options. And again, I just think we're not thinking far enough ahead and the impact on early literacy and what preschool can do in these elementaries.
Director Gordon?
I agree with Director Poston on that point. I don't think that we should delay putting sixth grade in the middle schools, partly because of the preschool needing to be in the elementary, but partly because one of the key assumptions on slide 15 is that this plan limits the numbers of families impacted, and I understand that to mean that it limits the numbers of families who will have to change elementary schools. But if, and this is a large number of students are going to have to change for 1 year to go to sixth grade in a new building and then change again the year after to go to a middle school. And transitions are really hard on our students as it is. So that's asking a whole lot of them. And that's asking a lot out of those staff members as well, you know, to transition from their current school to a new elementary school. And then potentially, you know, if they're sixth grade teachers, then they have to pack up all their things and move to yet another school the next year. And I just think I don't think that's the best use of the plans that we have available to us. And so if it's we need to save so much money by next year, then maybe we consider closing 2 elementaries next year and moving the sixth grade back and push a third elementary out a year if that's what we need to do.
Director Gordon? Or Director Klein?
My concern about moving sixth graders, we have now for several months said, we are not moving them. We are not moving them. Parents are under the assumption we are not moving them. And some parents breathed a sigh of relief. They aren't quite ready to put their kids in there next year. They know it's coming, but we have said it's not going to happen next year. And so now to suddenly say to them, oh, sorry, we changed our mind and we're going to send your kid next year. I don't think we're taking into consideration the parents' perspective on this and whether they're ready to make that jump next year. Since we have said for the last 2-3 months, not next year.
Director Gordon?
I hear what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree with that because as a parent, that is stressful. But on the whole, I think that was the district's plan and the architect's plan, but I don't think the board has ever fully come out and been like, yes, that's absolutely definitely what we're doing. Because it's up to us. I know when people have asked us, I'm like, we haven't made any decisions yet. So.
Director Poston?
Whenever the sixth graders are moved, what impact will this have on, or will it have any impact on our boundaries? Because what I don't want to see is a year or two down the road, all of a sudden, we're changing boundaries again.
When we ran the numbers, we also looked up our current fifth grade, our current sixth grade, and we made contingency plans. If the board directed us to do one thing, could we make it work? The answer was yes. If the board directed us to do another thing, could we make it work? The answer is yes. So regardless, sixth grade does not impact a vote that you would have to make.
First, I want to thank you all for the presentation. I really appreciate putting the little people in there. It put it in perspective. I understand the concern with the sixth graders, and I understand the point of wanting to wait that year. I feel like in this district, all we have ever done has been so reactive, and we just cram stuff out. We had a former employee that said we got to move the sixth graders down because there was a game plan there. It didn't work. Stuff didn't get rolled out right, and now we're trying to take the time to do that. So I appreciate that a lot. I appreciate all the thought and effort that's went into everything. Again, I don't want to get into the spot where we got to hurry up and throw the sixth graders back. We're not going to have supports in there. We're not going to do all this because, you know, with everything going on, we have to make sure. And that's my question, what supports are going to be in place for the buildings that are going to be getting those students because we're already understaffed. I mean, that's very apparent. You know, not as many people want to come work for schools, and it's not just Davenport, it's other school districts too. I had someone the other night say, well, so-and-so district only has so many openings, but you guys have all these. Well, that school could shut down tomorrow and fit in our school, so, and we wouldn't even blink an eye, and people need to start realizing that stuff. We're not small like a lot of these districts. We're a big entity. We have a lot of moving parts. But my question is, what supports are going to be in there? Are we going to have enough teachers to fill the spots, enough paras, enough custodians, security secretaries, FNS? Are we going to have enough people that are going to be able to do this and to help out with a smooth transition?
That's an excellent question, and one of the opportunities in this time is to reset the district standard. What is the district standard? And the board challenges that all the time. What are the expectations for a 500 elementary school, 450 elementary schools? How many counselors per student? How many para educators? What's the office support look like? So we have been working on that as we move forward, and it's a delicate balance. So every time we sit down and say these are the supports needed, Jamie and Kevin say, whoa. So we are now, for the first time, doing both of those things together. So we actually put it in our sheet, we run the finances, and we do a long-range projection for it, knowing that we're trying to give our employees the compensation they deserve coming out of the pandemic, knowing that when our students move from this location to another, that the buildings will be larger. So that those are the things that we're doing right now. So what is the district standard as we move out? The second component of that is when students move, when the boundaries move, now our Title I and at-risk funding follow as well. So the best that we can do is utilize the students that we have now, project where they're going, and move those funds. I'm very proud to say that Courtney Olson has some task teams going to review what does Title I funding look like? What does our at-risk dropout prevention look like? So the presentation that you're going to get next month is going to be a little different, or next week, thank you, Courtney, is going to be a little different than what you're usually getting for the at-risk dropout prevention, because we have to have a horizon conversation of what do those supports look like. I will tell you, the people that we met with all the principals today and with our cabinet, and they have wonderful ideas about what supports are necessary because they're living and breathing it today. Our HR department is very aggressively interviewing every student teacher that we have in our district. We're posting jobs earlier than we have, getting our staffing done sooner than we have. We're fine tuning how we hand out our contracts, and so all of those things are going to help us get out ahead of the process. We're getting ready to go into negotiations, so all of those things are what can allow us to be a competitive workplace. This will be a difficult transition. Anytime you move from this building to this building, it will be difficult. The most important thing that we can do in that time is make sure that we're communicating early and often and collapsing any void. Wherever there's an information void, we have to jump in it and answer questions face-to-face, frequently asked question sheets. I know Jamie has already been in talks with all of the unions to make sure that our process is correct for the transfer language. So I know that she's already begun to do that work. This week, the finance committee's going to get together, I think, at 2:00 to look at the 5-year projections for what we're looking to do. So while these are very difficult times, if you can see what's coming, the reallocation of our resources, the needs assessments that are occurring, and it won't happen overnight, but the current staff that we have, we're going to utilize those staff members during that transition, and we're going to utilize their voice, our administrator's voice, to help build the strongest transition that we can for this year.
I got one other follow-up on that. Are we able to, and if I'm getting out of the realm, let me know and I'll make a board request on it, but I know we have certified staff that could be working in the classrooms, but they're not. Are we able to utilize those people to help fill some of these positions as well, to help with all the support and stuff. I know there's like a ton that never even see a classroom.
Anywhere there's an opening, we fill that void with somebody that's not with students. I don't know if that's
Okay.
but we definitely I can share that with you.
Okay, thank you. Director Costigan?
With all the boundary changes, how many of our elementaries will be title schools?
So the current 3 buildings are title schools, so that will be a reduction in 3. And we were not quite positive yet, depending on the mobility of the students, but then adding an additional 1.
So that'll be a total of how many?
10. I'll get you that number exactly. But then again, the way we've traditionally used our title funds and dropout prevention funds is being reimagined. And then a brand new district standard. And what that means is, where do we put reading interventionists and why do we put them there? Where do we have SAMs? Where do we have teacher in charges? So those resources, what does that look like? So that's what we're kind of reimagining right now during this process without completely upsetting the apple cart. So the title funds will be a key cog in this. And I see that those resources will be maximized and kind of go with our students as much as possible.
If I could add one additional point, keep in mind that the number of grade level sections per each building is going to grow. So when those title funds move, they're also going to touch more families, more students, because now you're distributing them to a bigger population. So it's going to be an opportunity to become more effective as you distribute those funds when they move with those students.
On another point, when you look at the figures that you presented, when you talked about the maximum, minimum, and then the average, there's still quite a few buildings that are not at capacity, okay? So when you look at this, say a year or 2 down the road, and all of a sudden you look at it and say, okay, we're not keeping these buildings full, we need to close another building, okay? So then we're changing boundaries again, correct? If we close another building? Okay. So I guess my question is, or my comment is, you know, are we going far enough to, and looking down the road far enough so that we don't go through all this again with boundary changes?
It's a difficult proposition what you're asking. So when we looked at change, we looked at it from an organizational and pathway standpoint, and that organizational change moving from the current organization to the projected, which is, you know, moving back to a 6-8 middle school experience with a K-5 elementary, that originally called for a reduction of 2 buildings. We are actually proposing 3 because it made sense from a regionalized standpoint looking at the district. We had proposed change elsewhere in the district that was something that didn't reduce buildings though. I think the district has opportunities to consider other closures, but I would argue that you want to be careful not to do too much too soon, because as we're finding out from this conversation tonight, it's a lot to grapple with. There's a lot of planning, there's a lot of care and caution that have to get exercised as you do this. I think we need to understand the impact of what happens when we make these changes, because it will help influence those future changes as they move. The other point to note is it changes that entire study from a capacity standpoint once this change gets adopted, because now we've filled buildings from a different standpoint. And so we likely will have an opportunity to consider other closures. It's just the target has moved, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. And I mean, we're doing a lot at once, and the problem is that we're making up for lost time. The reason we're having to do so much now is because nothing was done for the last few years. So, just one other thing, Mr. President, I would have a request for next week when we vote on this. I would prefer that it be broken down into two separate votes, voting on closing of the 3 schools and then a vote on moving the 6th grade.
Director Potts, you got anything? Everybody else has went.
I think we need to remember the reason we went into this was where our goal is to improve the experience for all of our students in all of our buildings. And that's our goal. And I'm not sure we're going to improve the experience of 6th graders by moving them without any real foundational preparation so we can have preschools. I think if we're talking about converting our junior highs to middle schools, that's a completely different delivery system for all the students in that building. And then there has to be some sort of training or preparation of the staff so that they understand the middle school concept and what the expectations are going to be then for the staff. I think too, we had a presentation on our middle school curriculum not too long ago that I at least felt was the lowest common denominator for the opportunities we were going to provide our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. If we're going to go to the middle school concept, if we can afford that, and we're going to move the 6th graders, we need to restructure the entire exploratory experiences for them because they don't really hardly exist any longer. We need to determine how we're going to deliver instrumental music to the 6th graders when they come in. We've got to decide what a 6th grader is going to take when they get there. Are they going to be in the same mold as they are now, or are we going to change the curriculum approach? Are they going to have double period of English and reading or not? There's a whole... I was there when we moved 6th graders the first time. And it was like, you got a phone, not literally, but you got a phone call. Okay, hey, guess what? Next year, 9th grade's gone, you got 6th graders. What the hell are you doing them? What does it look like? How do we plan for that? And I think taking 6 months this spring, winter and spring, to plan for that will make that transition much more effective and positive for the 6th graders that'll be involved in that movement. I just really do. And I think it would be an important investment on our part to do it that way.
Any other questions? Is there any other information the board members would like to see before we vote on this Monday, the 12th? I wrote down a note on yours breaking out into the 2 different.
But we're not voting boundaries, right?
I believe it's going to be on the 3 closures, and then the 6th graders moving would be the 2. Does anyone need any other information? Make sure you clean that stuff up before you post it, because 2 of the cameras already left, and I don't want to miss reporting it the wrong way. They got time slots to sell, you know. Director Gordon.
Sorry, I do want to just make one comment, because with all of the slides talking about the low SES and the high SES and trying to keep within that 3 percentage points on either side of 69%, and seeing some of those numbers in some of the buildings being as high as 88%, And then seeing the flip side of that, where our Westcott schools are high SES between 54 and 74, that's like literally a flip flop from what we're seeing in our Davenport schools. And so it concerns me that yet again, we are going to uproot the lives of several of our low SES families, and we are once again not going to impact those with more resources again. I just want that on the record.
Thank you. Anyone else? Again, thank you very much for the presentation. Closing schools is just no fun at all. I appreciate the approach with the regional part so that not one region's affected way more than the other one. I like the fact of the feeder part of it too. If you go to this elementary, you're going to go to this junior high. It kind of builds that school culture that a lot of our surrounding districts have because they have one high school. So again, thank you all very, very much. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is it- Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.